Good afternoon, everybody. That sounds a bit loud. Welcome to Darlington. I'm Peter Strachan. I'm the chair of the North East Ambulance Service. Can I say you're all very welcome here this afternoon. We thought it was important to come a bit further south for our annual general meeting and our annual members meeting. We are often accused of being a Newcastle-centric organisation, but hopefully coming to Darlington today will redress some of that balance. Can I just ask, we've got a live stream broadcast of this annual general meeting. If there is anybody who does not want to be on camera, could you please indicate now, and we'll make sure the camera to my right there is switched off. But if everybody is comfortable being on camera, we will keep it on for the purposes of the live stream. Thank you. The other thing I'd like to say in opening is at the end of the immediate presentation session, when we've been through the formal business of the annual report and the presentation by the Chief Executive and our Director of Finance, we will follow with a question and answer session. We've had a number of questions already submitted by members and members of the public, which we'll be able to take then, and then we'll open up for more general questions. So just to give you that assurance that when we get to that opportunity, colleagues will have the opportunity to have the questions answered that they have pre-submitted, but also we will open it to the floor for questions then. So we do have some procedural stuff to get through, as it's the annual general meeting and the annual members meeting. So first of all, can I ask, are there any from members declarations of interest that colleagues would like to bring to our attention now? No, thank you. Then I could go to the previous meeting minutes, which we held back on the 22nd of September 2022 in Gateshead College. The minutes are available to members who were there. Can I just ask if colleagues are happy that those are a true record of proceedings, particularly looking at colleagues who were there? Thank you very much. And are there any matters arising from those minutes that we held back on the meeting that we held back on the 22nd of September 2022? No, thank you very much. So without further ado, let's move to the review of the year and the annual report for 22-23. Can I invite Helen Ray, our Chief Executive, to take us through that, please? Helen.
Thank you, Peter. And just to reiterate my welcome to everybody who's taken the time today. This is our review of the year 22-23. It always seems a bit odd, doesn't it, when you're sitting at almost at the tail end of the following year to be reflecting on what appears to be quite a significant period ago. But the way that our systems and processes work, we often find ourselves playing a little bit of catch-up. And I know that all of our other colleague organisations are planning their annual general meetings around the same time. So we're really happy to see people today. And as Peter said, my job immediately is to just go through the year of review that we are talking about. So the first thing to do is just to reflect a little bit on our strategy, which runs from 2021 to 2026. We launched that in the middle of COVID, in a very difficult time. And we're about halfway along this work. We would have to be honest and say it's hit some bumps when we were working through that strategy in COVID. But now that we're at the other end of things, it's a really great opportunity to start to cement the changes and the positive things that we want to do as NEAS to make sure that we are doing the very best that we can for the population that we serve. We will be refreshing our strategy over the next 18 months. We've just been talking about that this morning. So I'd be grateful if colleagues here and members of the public would just watch out for the opportunities to be part of that, because we will have an opportunity this time to engage and consult much more deeply, and we'll be very keen to hear from you all about where you want us to go as your local ambulance provider. And we remain very ambitious as an organisation. The service that we want to provide, we want that to be the very best it can be every time that we make contact with an individual or a member of the public. So we will maintain that ambition. Thanks, Lauren. It's been another extraordinarily busy year during 22-23. You can see that from the numbers that are on the screen in front of you. I just particularly wanted to highlight a few things from there rather than just run through all of the numbers individually. It's really fantastic, I think, to see the growth in defibrillator numbers. And I highlight that because that growth is supported by many local groups. It is a life-saving investment in equipment and allows us to support, and you all to support, and members of the public to support, bystander CPR where it is required to give the very best chance of life to those patients who require that defibrillation. We're also exceptionally lucky to have about 250 volunteers working with us across our organisation in many roles and in a huge variety of roles. And it's really great to see, I think, despite some of the challenges that we've all faced, that 90% of our patients continue to rate our services as good or very good. Thanks, Lauren. Patient experience is important to us, and you know, the numbers are there again for you to see. But what I wanted to say as the Chief Executive of the organisation is, for us, every complaint or query raised with us is seen as an opportunity to learn and improve. I hope you can see from the figures, you will be able to see from the figures, that we've still got more to do. That job will never be done for us as an organisation. We will always be striving to be better. We want to make sure that our 111 service is more responsive. We've made huge strides this year in that aren't reflected in the figures that you see from 22-23. And Stephen, who's our Chief Operating Officer, and all of our colleagues in operational services are working tirelessly behind the scenes, because we know that when someone picks up the phone and wants to speak to someone either through the 111 or the 999 service, the critical thing for us is being able to respond very quickly and then to get people to the right place for the care that they require. And it's possible, isn't it, that, you know, not everybody needs hospital. Traditionally, when you think about ambulance services, we think about the blue lights, we think about the ambulances that are on the road. But actually some of the work that we are doing as a response to some of the, you know, elongated waits that we've had, that all ambulance services have had, is what are the alternative pathways that we can explore? How could patients get to the right care in a different frame that might not be hospital to give them the best response? And then I'll just take you through, I think we might have lost that, Lauren. The slides have disappeared. Sorry, we'll just get the slides back up. It's always the tech, isn't it, that causes you a little bit of a hiccup. Thank you. Doesn't matter how many run-throughs you do, does it? There's always something glitches for you. Thank you. I've probably stood on something that wouldn't be the first time. There we go. Oh. Okay. So I just want to take you through the annual report and accounts in a little bit more detail. Focusing on what we colloquially call our P's and Q's. It's a bit of a Geordie saying that, isn't it? Where you are with your P's and Q's. I remember my mum saying, Helen, you need to mind those. So first of all, we just wanted to talk about performance within that frame. So take the next one, Lauren, thank you. So it was a very challenging year in terms of performance in the year that we are reporting. We certainly were nowhere near where we aspired to be. And I am sure those of you who are working and living in your local communities will have heard of cases where we had significant elongated wait. That's not an acceptable position to be in, but that has been a national issue that we at NEAS are part of, but that we at NEAS are very, very keen to resolve. It's absolutely staggering, I think, every time I do this, to see the volume of calls that we receive during any 1 year period. In excess of 1.3 million in total. Our people who work in our emergency operations centres responding to those calls, we refer to as our headset heroes. They're the first point of contact for many of you or many of your friends and family who need our service. We took 280,000 people to hospital as an emergency, and we also transported about 500,000 people to routine hospital appointments or in or out of hospital. So that, I just think, demonstrates the scale and size of our organisation. You know, we cover from the borders at Berwick through to the borders at Yorkshire. We cover coastal, we cover rural, and we cover urbanisation. And those of you who live in each of those communities absolutely deserve the best that we can provide. So I'm just going to touch on the performance frame. So as I said earlier, we are ambitious, but at this point, while I'm proud that we're doing well in many areas, the response to our Category 2 performance still needs to be better. Those of you who know the ambulance service a little bit will know that within that frame, there are patients who could be suffering potential stroke, who are leading up potentially to a cardiac arrest, or who have another significant urgent care need that we need to respond to quickly. That requires a whole system approach to shift the dial on that. It's not just in the purview of NEAS to be able to do that. So part of our work in improving our performance is working in partnership with our local providers. I've got someone from North Tees here, I know, from the team, and we've done some excellent work with North Tees in making sure that, you know, the handovers are very, very low, the times for that in North Tees. We're very grateful for that, because what that means is we're cleared in a really quick time to be able to respond to those Category 2 emergencies that are waiting in the community. So GPs, social care, community, mental health colleagues are all playing a part in helping us to improve that performance. Thanks, Lauren. I've got some numbers, so I'll just press on because I've got the slides. So we talk about, and you know, those of you who look at the press or you know, watch the news of an evening, you will know that handover delays have been a real significant focus for ambulance services, and you can't fail to have seen last winter the news reels that showed great big long queues in some parts of the country of ambulances waiting to hand over, sometimes for a whole shift, sometimes a paramedic with a single patient or two paramedics with a single patient for actually what was their whole shift. And just for us in numbers for NEAS, in 21-22, our handover delay hours were 24,892. But in 22-23, they were 33,318 hours. That's hours spent where we should actually be responding to patients. And we recognise and don't criticise our acute provider colleagues within that frame. But we did have some very long waits, and we know that we've got a lot of work to do. And we will hopefully start to see that dial turn. We will see that dial turn when we present the 23-24 report next year. We haven't rested on that. We have done some significant work. We do receive you know, I've talked about the learning that we take if we have an incident or we receive a complaint, but we do receive some absolutely amazing feedback for our teams too. And I do think that that's well deserved and just worthy of sharing a couple of those with you today. So we had an appreciation sent in for one of our South Carlin Howe emergency crews, where the family said they made us feel so at ease. They were really caring in their way of looking after my partner. They were so professional and just did a fantastic job of caring for them and also easing my stress and worries. In terms of the feedback for our emergency operations team, those headset heroes that I mentioned earlier, the lady who answered the phone was exceptional and calming. She got us an ambulance straight away and talked me through the steps I needed to take. I'm truly grateful for the support of the ambulance service. Thank you very much again. I've needed you more than once. And in terms of our volunteers, who I mentioned, both drivers were courteous, they were kind, they put up with my chattering and clumsy ways. They and all your drivers I've encountered over the years are really wonderful people, kind-hearted, decent, with great patience and a great sense of humour. And lastly, for our scheduled care, I live in a high-rise block of flats, and I was a bit really apprehensive about how I would manage. But I needn't have worried, as the crews were so very kind. They collected me from my flat and brought me home and saw me safely back into my flat. Each one of them were cheerful and kind, and it was a real pleasure to meet them. And the thing I was reflecting on when I was putting the slides together for this is the kindness of our staff, the compassion that they show. And we need to harness that, we need to keep that, we need to have that 100% of the time. So I just wanted to share a few of those with you today. I referenced quality priorities a little bit earlier, and I just want to take you through those in a little bit more detail on the next slides. So we set ourselves 4 quality priorities in 22-23. There are copies, I think, of our quality report that are available to outline progress against those in more detail, and I really hope that you'll get the opportunity to read those. So for priority 1, which was working with our system partners to reduce handover delays, we've kind of assessed ourselves against where we thought we were with those in that year that we are reporting today. We've made some good progress, but we have to recognise there's more to do. It's recognised as a national concern that working with system partners on handover delays has not really completely shifted the dial yet. But we've got excellent engagement, and I used the example earlier of colleagues in this patch across North Tees, and we will continue with that work over the coming year, and I'll talk a little bit more about the priorities for this year in the coming slides. Priority 2 was to learn from incidents and prepare for the Patient Safety Incident Response Framework, known as PSIRF. We're really pleased to see that coming in, particularly for the ambulance sector, because the introduction of that framework is, it will provide a really high level of consistency that potentially isn't quite there at this moment in time when we compare ourselves with others. And it will also give us a really solid governance framework, both for our regulators and for ourselves to hold ourselves to account through. We are a learning organisation, and we will continue to demonstrate commitment to that through this new framework. And Julia, who's here, our Director of Quality, Julia is leading on that framework for us. And we have an ambition to have that up and running. Julia, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it's November this year. Priority 3 is to make sure that we use our resources as efficiently as possible by making better use of our clinical model. Now, as Chief Executive, if I had the commissioners in the room, I would always be saying to them I could do with a bit more cash. I could do with a bit more investment. But actually, we know that the NHS is in a difficult financial frame. What we can't do is let that unduly impact on us keeping quality and safety at the very forefront of everything that we do. And you can see that we've made really excellent progress against that priority 3. The money that we have, the resources that we spend, it's all about making sure that from an accountability frame for us as the board and for all of our teams, that the money that we have is used in the very best way to make sure that we address the quality and safety as the forerunner for everything that we do. And we are developing our clinical model to demonstrate to our board and our commissioners evidence of good practice that we have been able to take forward with the funding that we have received to make sure that we can do more and better in the future. Priority 4 is around involvement of our patients and communities to improve care. In a couple of these areas, I think you can, or you can't see from the slide, we can circulate these slides or give people the copies of them afterwards. In a couple of those areas for the slides, we haven't quite made the progress that we would like to make. So we're going to look for opportunities to include patient representatives on our quality and assurance committees. And I've just been talking to Bill, one of our Health Watch leads today, and just re-cementing the importance of that relationship for us in that frame. We haven't given up on any of those priorities. We will increase our engagement events in person and virtually. We were talking about the fact that we all went to kind of working in our homes, didn't we? Those who could, those who were unable to, stayed on the front line. But we have to increase those engagement events virtually, working with our Health Watch colleagues, our local authorities, our commissioners, our governors, our MPs, and members of the public who wish to be involved through groups or as individuals. We'll continue to explore the opportunity to develop volunteers and community responders. They provide an absolutely outstanding support service for us as an organisation. And we will continue to listen to patients, families and carers and respond to their feedback in the very best way that we possibly can. We will roll all of those priorities forward into 23-24. I'll just pause, Lauren, and see if we can get the 23-24 up, because I'm conscious that's difficult for the audience to follow what I'm saying. There we go. Let's fingers crossed that we hold that frame on that now. So the 23-24 quality priorities that we've set out. Number 1 is that we will continue working with our system partners to reduce handover delays. And that is important because we actually want to be out there responding to you, to your loved ones, in the quickest possible way that we can. We know that when we reach our patients, the clinical services that we provide are excellent. We get that great feedback and our outcome measures demonstrate that. But there's more to do to make sure we respond as quickly as possible. We will respond to patient safety incidents in a way that leads to service improvement and safer care for all our patients. If we aren't a learning organisation, we aren't a great organisation. And we have to really hold the frame on learning. It is important to us as a board. It is exceptionally important to me as the Chief Executive of this organisation. We'll probably talk in a little bit about areas where we didn't get that right. But we have to now pick ourselves forward and make sure that we do things right for the future. We will implement clinical supervision for our teams. That's been commonplace in hospitals for a long time. Those of you who work in hospitals or those of you who have a clinical background will know that taking time for our clinicians to have adequate supervision is vitally important. the ambulance sector has been playing a little bit of catch-up on that. But now we have, we keep introducing Andrew, a director of paramedicine. So our biggest clinical workforce are allied health professionals in the shape of paramedicine. And actually we want our paramedic workforce and all of the workforce that support those paramedics to have the very best framework and the very best supervision to make them the very best clinicians. And as I said on the previous slides, we will increase our service user and colleague involvement in our patient safety and in our patient satisfaction activities, and we welcome any offers and any volunteers to help us with that. I want to touch on the Care Quality Commission now, because everyone who has looked at anything to do with NEAS will know that you might not know the dates, but on the 26th to 28th of July in 22, we had 2 core service line inspections across emergency operations centres and urgent and emergency care services, colloquially known as unscheduled care in the Trust. We also had a Boardwell-led inspection, which took place on the 13th to the 15th of September, and a separate CQC inspection team carried out an unannounced inspection of our 111 services also during the 13th and 14th of September. As a result of that inspection, the Trust was downgraded in our ratings. I can't tell you how disappointing that is for us as an organisation, but actually we recognise some of the criticism that came from that and some of the recommendations. And if I go back to the fact that we have to be a learning organisation, we don't fight against that. We embrace it. We say, what did you see? What did you find? What do you think we could do better? And then we describe how we are going to do that. And that's the journey that we are on currently. They have been back to re-inspect, particularly our urgent care services early in 23, and did reflect that there were some improvements in medicines management, which was a critical area of concern when they came with us. We've put more structure, more rigour in our processes, and incidents with harm are much less. We have reviewed our incident management, and they said they could see the beginnings of that safety culture emerging. We absolutely have to hold on to that. That is fundamental in the things that we do moving forward. There's much more structure in reviewing and investigating incidents, but still some issues with reporting and more to do with duty of candour. We haven't rested on our laurels there, and the recent reports that are coming through our board show that our duty of candour is enacted as quickly as it is feasibly possible for all families now. There was some significant learning that we had from that, and I'm pleased to see that improvement made. In terms of culture, that's a really mixed picture for us as an organisation, and we want staff to feel really comfortable to speak up. Our CQC report and our annual staff survey tells us that we've still got more to do. That cultural piece takes time. It takes time to turn things around and give our staff confidence and therefore our public confidence that we are doing everything that we possibly can in that frame. And to do that, we have to have this thing called beautiful bureaucracy, don't we? Everybody rails a little bit about bureaucracy, but the governance piece is the piece that holds us safe. The infrastructure is there for a purpose. The board processes have been reviewed, and although we have, we've still got some work to do with that, it's probably a little bit too early to determine the impact. But in the turn of the calendar year, we will be inviting an independent company to come and assess us on our journey so far, and then we will regroup and take some further learning from that. So it's hard not to be disappointed when your service ratings deteriorate following inspection, but we owe it to the population we serve and to our staff to take those recommendations and use them to frame our improvements as I said, we don't shy away from that as an organisation. We've got a very clear action plan. We report that action plan to our regulators through the Integrated Care Board. We have a Quality Improvement Board in place that is co-chaired by the Integrated Care Board, who are our commissioners/regulators, and NHS England, who have a regulatory frame, and the CQC inspectors locally sit on that, and we are very clearly providing assurance, that show me, don't tell me piece, to demonstrate that the changes that we said we would make, we are making in those 4 areas detailed. And I want to touch on the independent review. So technically, the independent review was published in the following year, but we are really conscious that that's been a long time in the making for people. It was, so the publication of that has been quite rightly a major focus of attention for our organisation. I haven't covered it in detail here because it's actually not necessarily the purpose of the annual general meeting. But I didn't want not to mention that. I think it is very important that we acknowledge that. And again, that we make that public statement of apology where we did not get things right for the families who have very ably and very openly shared their stories with Dame Marianne Griffiths, who conducted the independent review. The detail of how it arose is on there. But actually, it's what we do now. I think that is vitally important, how we provide assurance and confidence that the required improvements are being made and that we can provide the evidence to show that. That is vitally important, particularly to some of the individuals who are sitting in this room today. It is equally as important to me and to the board of NEAS that we do that. Again, we owe that duty to the public. Thanks, Lauren. We can't do any of that change, make any of that progress without the people who work in our organisation. An organisation is only as good as the people who they have within it. We have a clear commitment in our report to the growth of our existing workforce and to the attraction and to the retention of new people and our existing people. We need to look after those that are here, and we need to recruit the very best for the population that we serve. We've made some significant investments to do that. We worked very closely with our commissioners to ensure that a level of investment came to NEAS. And that was because of some of those areas of concern. The Integrated Care Board, our commissioners, stood alongside us with that and helped us with that investment. I still think we need a bit more, but that'll come in our annual review with them and in our annual planning. So we've invested in frontline services to increase our paramedic workforce and our AOC staff. We've invested in our specialist paramedic roles. So we have a really great specialist paramedic team that was funded non-recurrently. So we kind of rolled over a bit of cash every year, said, don't worry, we'll get you sorted out eventually. Well, we did that. We got them sorted out eventually, which is fantastic. And we've introduced some support roles as well. For this patch, I think it's nice to note that we opened a new emergency operations centre at Winter House to provide services into the Tees Valley. There's nothing beats local knowledge, is that when you're doing that thing and you're dispatching ambulances, knowing the road infrastructure as a basic is one of those kind of critical things. And as a big employer, we also felt that we owed a duty to capture some fantastic workforce from the Tees Valley, which we're really pleased that we've been able to do. And if I come back to that freedom to speak up, that confidence for our colleagues and members of the public to tell us when things aren't right, We have invested in some independent support to our Freedom to Speak Up Guardian processes, and we continue to work with the national team within that, so that we can make sure that that continues to grow from strength to strength. And this is what our people have to say. I think when I was given the slides, I had 4 slides about what people wanted to tell us, but I've slimmed it down, so we've just got a couple of our staff telling you in their own words why they want to work with us. So Olivia, you might recognise Olivia from the ambulance programme that was on TV. To be able to do this job requires a lot of patience, empathy and understanding. It's really important not to discount any patients. Even after a few hard hours of work, it is important to be able to think quickly but decisively and be confident with the support around you. And Sammy has said, I don't want anyone to feel the way that I felt, and that's why I do the job. Coming to work helps my mental health because I know I'm making a difference. When I was in that position, I just wanted someone to help me. Isn't it lovely that we've got staff who are using their own personal experiences to do the very best that they can for others? And it's important that we work in a very positive partnership frame. Our system is huge, and although it's quite nice because we're co-terminus, we've got a single integrated care board that we are co-terminus with, so it's the same footprint as NEAS is kind of what I mean by that. We work very closely across that footprint with that alignment, but we also work tirelessly with North West Ambulance Service and with Yorkshire Ambulance Service because, of course, they hit our borders in the way that we are. Stephen's worked in some of those organisations previously, and one of the great things of having that is you bring that experience and learning, you bring the best practice, you can look at where other people are doing things better than us and pinch with pride, and we do that on a regular basis. We've had to change the way we work, I think, to be the most effective partner. We significantly restructured in this year our operational services so that we could align ourselves with the boundaries of the integrated care system, which is split in a kind of north, central and south frame, because we want to make sure that for each of those integrated care partnerships, people know who that trusted partner is, they know who they need to go to if they want to ask a question, they know who to approach if they want to do some work collaboratively with us. And we've recently, as a board, signed up to, in this year, the North East and North Cumbria Provider Collaborative. So the Provider Collaborative is the group of all of the acute providers within our patch. So that all of the hospitals, the mental health trusts and ourselves as an ambulance service, we're ambitious to grow that because we're very conscious that actually the vast majority of care that happens for patients and the things that keep patients really safe and well is the stuff that happens in primary care or in community. So we will expand over the course of the coming year. But that is our commitment to being an effective system partner. And just a few examples of that. So we have a really small but perfectly formed pathways team. They work tirelessly to understand what the best result is for patients. When we turn up to an incident, often people have their bags packed because there is an assumption, well, you're sending me an ambulance, I need to go to hospital. But actually, sometimes hospital's not the best place for you. Sometimes it can, make things worse rather than make things better. So we're working on those community pathways to make sure that we've got lots of ways of getting the patient to the right care the first time possible. Some of that work we're doing with our trusted partner in Northumbria. They are also working as a buddy to us as we work through the independent review recommendations. And they have opened up access for our colleagues, our practitioners, to directly admit or directly take patients to some services that previously they would have had to access via A&E. We're further developing our community paramedics and paramedics in primary care. Our paramedics are highly skilled. They don't just do emergency care. And if you did see any of the ambulance programme, you will see the gamut and the range of the work that they deal with. So let's use those skills in the best way that we possibly can. We know that, for example, our primary care colleagues are really stretched. So as good partners, how do we help with that? I won't touch again on handover delays, but it is really important that we keep going with those. We also have delivered a positive action officer project, which started in the year reported. And that allows us to reach out particularly to ethnic minority population communities who would not traditionally engage in conducting cardiopulmonary resuscitation or basic first aid. And we have had an amazing response, and we have trained hundreds of people now in those ethnic minority populations to have the confidence to start resuscitation and to understand the importance of it. That has been a really, really positive programme for us. And they also spend time raising awareness of employment opportunities and recruitment through our community volunteers and through our community ambassador programmes, all of whom are volunteers into our service. A phenomenal result. So I'm going to take a very short break and have a quick glass of water, and I'm just going to introduce Taryn, who's going to run through the financial results and the investment. Over to you, Taryn.
Thanks, Helen. Good afternoon, everybody. So hopefully you can see from the slide we have delivered a surplus for 22-23 that is in line with our requirements from NHS England this year. As Helen's alluded to during the presentation, we have had a significant increase in income during the year through the investment that we've secured from our commissioners. We have invested that significantly in the workforce, but we have also invested our cash into significant capital, vehicles, equipment, etc. during the year, and that has resulted in a reduction in our cash balance that we have at the moment, although we still have sufficient cash to pay our suppliers and to pay our staff. And at the end of the year, we've been subject to the normal external audit that you would expect. That has resulted in an unqualified audit opinion, which I'm pleased to say. They did identify a significant weakness linked to the CQC inspection, which Helen has taken us through previously in the report, and that's detailed on the slide and in the accounts if anybody would want to read those. As we've mentioned, we've had significant support from our commissioners during this financial year and into 23-24, which will come look at our sort of look ahead, and that has gone into, as I've mentioned before, significant workforce investment as well as our sort of support services to wrap around our frontline crews. So I'm hoping, given what we've had, we'd be able to just play a short video which will give you an idea of what the things are that we've invested into in 22-23. So, Lauren.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because if you were standing in the AGM of a hospital service, when they were showing you about investment, they'd show you buildings and they'd show you the places that people go for treatment. The places that people go for treatment in our service tends to be the back of a vehicle. So it is extraordinarily important that we have the best vehicle fleet that we possibly can. My background's acute services, and I found it a bit odd to adjust to my thinking to that when I first came over to NEAS. So some really great investment within there. So just want to give you now a little brief review of where we're planning to go over the next 12 months. So just really starting with our overview of transformation programmes. So as an organisation, you should be looking to improve and transform the whole time. You should be always looking to get better. So there are 5 things set out within our frame here. So the clinical and operating model. So, you know, how do we clinically work and how do we operationalise that clinical workforce? So we're working at this moment in time to develop and implement that operating model and clinical workforce for NEAS, which integrates better and more appropriately into our health and care system. That'll take a little while, and it will rely on us being able to recruit the right workforce for that. And it will rely on us working very closely with our staff, our colleagues in the organisation, to make sure that we take from them the learning. It's the people at the sharp end who understand what that needs to look like, not necessarily the people like me who are standing at the front of the podium. We want to look at alternative community pathways with the system. So how do we develop more our interventions to support upstream intervention and avoid the requirement for ambulance transportation to hospital? What is the best thing that we can do for the patients in the community? Some people need to go to hospital, don't get me wrong. But actually, you know, we do get feedback from our acute colleagues that sometimes the patients who are there, they know that there might have been an alternative. So we will continue the work that we've started in that frame. In terms of our Emergency Operations Centre, we're looking at that cultural and operational transformation, focusing on recruitment of staff with the funding that has been made available to us, but also improving the infrastructure for the clinical advisory service so that we've got a really great direction model for the integrated urgent care and with much greater integration to primary and urgent care in the communities. We're looking at our patient transport services, so those scheduled care services. So we haven't got to forget that 500,000 that I talked about at the front end of patients transported by our scheduled care colleagues. So we're going to focus on equipment, the operating model, the data that we can harness for that to make that as efficient and as effective as possible, and alongside communications and technology. There are lots, you'll see lots of different patient transport services out and about when you're in your cars or when you're moving around. We do think there is potentially some efficiency to be gained in NEAS being the lead provider for all of that service, so that we can coordinate that better and make that much more efficient for our patients. And we are going to focus with our colleagues on their working patterns. One of the things that has been said loudly and very clearly to us as a senior team is that our staff at the minute aren't really quite as happy as we want them to be with the way their rotas work, with the way their working patterns are, with the fact that they can't book their leave as quickly and as easily as they want to. You know, so we want to provide much more flexibility for our teams, and we're engaging with them to build that up from the bottom, rather than that be something that, you know, we decide in those senior teams. And we're grateful for the support and the support that our colleagues have given us so far and their involvement with that. We have to continue our performance improvement journey for the ambulance response programme. So those are those categories of response times that I put up earlier. That starts with call handling, but very, very importantly, this is not about the input of time. This is about the output of making sure that the quality of the service and the safety of the service is the best that we can be. And Kat, who's our medical director in the room, I always think about Kat as that conscience on my shoulder to pull us back to that thinking alongside our other clinical colleagues to make sure that all of the time we're thinking about that. We'll continue to focus on our strategic objectives and our quality priorities, which we've mentioned. We will continue to really push for a recurrent financial settlement for the organisation beyond 23-24 that allows us to continue this journey. There is a reality, isn't there, within that we do need the right level of funding on a sustainable footprint to be able to do that. And, you know, at the same time, we've got to become as efficient and effective as an organisation as we can possibly be. We'll continue to play a really active leadership role in our integrated care system, and we want to align our priorities to areas such as health inequalities. If I was, well, I am standing in that Tees Valley area, we know that, you know, the life chances, the career chances, the housing situations can be extraordinarily difficult for those communities that are at that lower end of income, etc. We know that there is a real financial struggle for people at this moment in time. So if we interface with thousands of patients a day, how can we help with that? How can we really do something different? So we're thinking about that. I don't really have the answer. So anything on a postcard, gratefully received. And we want to continue to learn from the independent review and our Care Quality Commission inspection and from the current Freedom to Speak Up national review that NEAS actively participated in terms of that learning frame. That will help us, I hope, with public assurance and confidence. But we've got some really strong foundations for the future. We have come a long way and we do have a lot to be proud of. And I hope I've been able to demonstrate some of that to you today in the audience. We have to continue building on those strong foundations that will help us in our service to be the very best that we can be so that we can provide the very best to you and to your loved ones. So that is the conclusion, I think, of our report. I'll hand back to Peter for a minute and then we'll move to questions.
Helen, thank you very much. And Taryn, thank you. A really good tour de force of everything that the organisation has been about in the last 12 months. I did say at the top of the show there's some procedural things that we still have to get through this afternoon, and one of those is to invite the members to review and accept the annual report, the annual accounts, and including the external audit opinion. Can I ask members present to indicate their acceptance of that? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So, we said that we've moved to questions. It's very important in the interest of transparency that we do allow opportunity for you in the members of the public here today to ask us some questions. As I said before, we've already had some questions submitted in advance. We've already replied to some of those by return email, but again, in the spirit of transparency, we're again happy to look at those, I think, Helen, this afternoon. And we're also happy to take any questions, as I said, from members of the public here present. Just one caveat to that. Clearly, there are several ongoing processes, including legal processes, which we might have difficulty sharing with you about individuals and individual cases. We will do our best to be as transparent and give you that assurance as we can, but some of those, I think, hopefully you'll understand that we're constrained by process there. That's not a question of not wanting to be transparent at all. It's just about being right and proper within those processes. So, Helen, if I can ask you, first of all, to review the questions that we've had submitted in advance, please, and take us through those. Thank you.
Thank you. We have had a number of questions submitted from Mrs Beadle, and I just wanted to address those first. And I know we emailed, but I just wanted to detail those transparently. So I'll read out the question and that kind of response. So Mrs Beadle has said, NEAS repeatedly said there was no way of knowing who was at the meeting when Alan Potts' report into Quinn's death was changed by Mr Aikenfell. Yet at the extraordinary board meeting, I knew suddenly who was there. How was this? How did NEAS suddenly produce a list of people who attended that meeting? I think that's a very pertinent question to ask. So the information that I provided at the extraordinary board meeting is on the basis of what I understand are the numbers of other people who were present. But I think we have to be really open and honest and say it remains the case that because that meeting was not minuted, there is no formal record for me to substantiate that. But we believe that those people who are listed at the extraordinary board were the people who were present at that meeting. And in the spirit of transparency, I don't see why we couldn't have just said that earlier, if I'm really honest. So who stopped the first inquest? Mrs Beadle has asked why I said at NEAS that NEAS stopped Quinn's first inquest before it began, when it was her who actually did that. I think we acknowledged that in the frame, and if I didn't make that clear, my apologies for that. But we do acknowledge and agree that you asked the coroner to pause the inquest, and that did happen. So I do apologise if I didn't explain that well in the extraordinary board. You've asked us, is the board aware of Dylan? Is the board aware of the details of what happened in Quinn's case? And are they aware that Dylan took his own life days after reading the report that was written by Ward Hadaway, Rachel Burks? I would say yes, the board are very aware of the details of Quinn's case, and they are also aware that Dylan took his own life very sadly after the report was shared. I just reiterate, we cannot imagine the devastation for all of you who have had to deal with that and the loss of your children. We have absolutely accepted fully and publicly that the trust did not handle that well. You and your family deserved better at that time. We absolutely remain wholly and completely committed to answering any questions for you, and we would reiterate our desire to meet with you so we can do that in the best way.
Why has it taken 4.5 years for the trust to finally admit that something went wrong in my daughter's death?
I don't think it has taken us that length of time, because obviously when I came into post, Mrs Beadle, I did acknowledge that. I did pick up your daughter's case very quickly.
You did not acknowledge it until I received your apology letter once the most recent review.
I think I have written to you on a number of occasions.
You have written on a number of occasions, but you've challenged everything that I've put in my complaint.
And we were asked in the recommendation to make sure, weren't we, that we made a full and public apology, which we have done.
Which has taken 4.5 years.
And I'm sorry if you feel that that's the length of time that is taken. You have also asked us about incorrect details being shared in correspondence, and that is really important. So I'll just read that out. So I did send an apology letter, you are quite right, on the 2nd of August, which inadvertently was misquoted as Quinn's death being 5.5 years ago, and of course it was 4.5 years ago. That is simply human error. You know, we are, you know, only human at the end of the day. But I absolutely understand the importance of detail when we are dealing with relatives. And, you know, I can only apologise for any instances where mistakes have been made in correspondence. And just to reiterate, we do really understand the importance of that.
The rest of that, when I've been called Mrs Quinn, when I've been called other names, you know, my daughter, if you can't get my daughter's name right, who died, by addressing me as Mrs Beadle, you're addressing me as my dead daughter's name. You know, if you can't get things like that right, how on earth can we expect you to get what happened to my daughter right?
I accept.
I understand human error, but there's been a hell of a lot of human error.
I accept how that has felt for you, Ms Beale, and I can only apologise for that, and we will endeavour to make sure that that doesn't happen. There's no intent behind that, but I can absolutely understand from your perspective.
I've been called Mrs. Quinn.
I can absolutely understand from your perspective how that will have felt.
I don't actually think any of us fully understand, to be perfectly honest, how it must feel the person to read that.
We don't dispute that. We aren't going to dispute that.
It's not a person in this room.
No, you're right. Those of us, Mrs. Beale has had such a significant loss. I accept that completely. Thank you.
To my daughter as male. This isn't just one mistake that you have made.
I can't say any more, I don't think, other than to reiterate that apology. We do accept that, absolutely. You've asked us, will anyone ever be held to account? Do you require the public to bring these matters to the attention of regulatory bodies as you seem unwilling to act yourself? Have people involved in discipline in the meeting been subject to disciplinary action, or do NEAS still insist that they all acted and continue to act in an appropriate manner? I do understand this is a really key concern that you still have. I'm obviously not going to discuss individuals in the room that wouldn't be appropriate, and as the chairman has said,
You don't need to say their names.
but in this meeting, I'm just being really open and saying this is what we can and what we cannot
4.5 years
discuss
and
at
the
this
only
point.
person that has faced anything is Gavin Wood, the paramedic, and that's because I reported him, not North East Ambulance Service.
We accept that, Mrs.
Four and a
Beadle.
half years later, and people are still in the same role. Some people have been promoted within that role. The person who changed that report, the document, that report, as our coroner said, he changed the outcome of that document from black to white. Even the paramedic said he should have commenced CPR on my daughter.
And that has come out in the independent review and the
And 4.5
recommendations,
years,
of
that
course.
person, he was promoted, and now he's still in that senior position, and he sits on the JR Calc guidelines board.
So you've made that statement. I understand that
And
that
he's
concern.
never receive any disciplinary procedures.
I've said I can't and won't discuss individuals in this frame. It wouldn't be appropriate. And the last question that you've asked is, please can we call Quinn by her name, not QM, as she was so much more than initials? Absolutely. We will reinforce and have done that with our teams. Initials are often used in reports where a person's identity should be protected, but we absolutely respect your wishes, and moving forward, we will refer to Quinn as her full name within the reports if that is what you'd like us to do. Of course, we'll do that. And just as a kind of proactive point, I just would really like to, reinforce. It's difficult, isn't it, to get full answers to a question in a forum like this. We would probably benefit from a conversation much more fully on that, either through the Independent Oversight Committee, or I reinforce my door is always open.
Helen, at the extraordinary general meeting, you lied to my face. So in a room where it's just the two of us, I do not trust you one bit to tell the truth to me and then change what you've said. The only way I would meet with you is if it was recorded.
That could happen, of course.
There was a meeting about my daughter's death, not a single minute was taken. How can that be when there was several meetings regarding her death? Not a single minute was taken. Is that what happens in NEAS? Do you never take minutes of meetings?
If you wanted to meet with me, Mrs. Beadle, on your terms, recorded or minuted, I'm absolutely comfortable to do that. I understand that would be the need and desire that you had for that, and we would accommodate that completely. And then we've had some questions from Mrs. McGurk, which I'll just move on to. And there were some statements which I haven't got. I have just moved to the questions, but you know, because obviously there were some statements that were made in the background of this, but there is some crux within this. So the first really question to us is why would families involved in or the North East public believe anything that NEAS has to say on the death scandal or any other matters? And what I would say to that, it is extraordinarily important to me and to the whole board that people and the families are confident in our services. We know that we still have to make ground on that. We do not dispute that. We want to be as open and transparent as possible. We want to provide evidence that we are acting upon the recommendations of the CQC and the independent review, and we will have to do that through both our regulatory framework and through the independent oversight committee to which families will be invited to participate in that, because it's not about us standing up and saying something, it's about us providing the evidence in the background that we have done something. You've asked us if we would support the call for a full statutory public inquiry into the deaths cover-up. That is not for us to determine. It's not for us to determine if any further reviews are needed. But if a further review was initiated, what I can say is that NEAS would fully engage with that. We will continue to be open and as transparent as we possibly can be to make sure that that public and family confidence is regained.
So you're saying you would support?
I'm not saying I would support, I'm saying it's not for me to determine that, but if there was... Or would you say no, I don't agree with it, or yes, I agree? It's not for us to determine that. It would only be for us as an organisation to participate in that if the government determined that that was the case. And I think the representation on whether or not that is taken forward sits with the government and not with us. The next question is actually about a patient, and I'm not quite sure we can speak about a patient who hasn't been part of the report in a public forum where that patient's family are not aware of that. So you have asked us a specific question about a death in 2008. So I won't be able to respond to that in full, but I would be happy to have a conversation about that. I don't think it's appropriate when that family aren't aware for us to answer anything about their loved one in a public meeting.
And again, it wasn't particularly about the individual, it was about the cover-up that ensued, I think, from the individual's death, regardless of who the individual was. It was more about the events.
Yeah, so I think in that frame, I think what we can say is we know that the independent review was commissioned because those concerns were brought forward and brought forward through, Prime Minister's questions due to the concerns that were raised by a whistleblower. And we welcome that independent oversight. We continue to do that. We continue as an organisation to welcome constructive criticism of us as a learning organisation. So I do understand your question, but I'm sure you'll appreciate why I'm a little bit reticent about naming individuals within there. Thank you for that. You've talked about spending money on reviews and items. So I'll just read the question out that you've asked, Mrs McGurk. So having spent almost £500,000 in public monies on the items below, why have we refused to publish details of the reports? Were the reports disclosed to the NHS England review panel chaired by Dame Marianne, and will the information be published in the Trust annual accounts? You've asked us about some specific issues about that. So before I do that, I would say, when we spend our money on anything that is like a review in the public interest, we have to make that publicly available. I think you've probably pulled those costings from our website, which shows that they are publicly available already in terms of the spend. So a number of those reports also are in the public domain, but from the specific things, everything that Dame Marianne felt was relevant to the independent review and requested, we provided to her. Anything that she requested, we gave her openly. And you've asked specifically, will these following items be included in the 22-23 accounts? So the first one is the interim audit 1 report. That expenditure was in 21-22, so no, it won't be reported in the accounts because it is historical and would have been reported in that area. And we are not obliged to provide that level of detail in our accounts. So while we publish on the website, our accounts don't ask us to specifically break that down, is the reality. You've asked about primary healthcare training limited expenditure, and that was also in the 21-22 period, so therefore not relevant to these accounts. The settlement agreement expenditure, which has been in the public domain, also was 21-22. The Value Circle LLP expenditure, it's real expenditure, but it actually relates to work undertaken to support board development, which was recommended by the independent review and from the CQC. And as I said, we're not required to report it separately in our accounts, but we have published that on the public-facing website. And then some expenditure with Veridern, which relates to support for further development of our transformation plans, working alongside some colleagues with more expertise than our organisation holds at this moment in time. And again, we've published that expenditure on the website, but you'll see, I think, from that explanation that quite a bit of that isn't pertinent to the independent review and is in historical years. You know, Taryn or myself would be more than happy to go through that in a bit more detail outside the meeting if you would find that helpful.
Yeah, and obviously that's why we pulled the figures.
Of course.
But it was the fullness of the review, not just about the cost. It was what the review was and what the reports and were. Why are they not available to?
So as I said, a number of these reports are available to the public. We'd be happy to list out the reports for you that have been put into the public domain. We're happy to share that with any members of the audience today if they would like to have that. And some have been withheld, and we've been open about that, particularly reports associated with freedom to speak up, where there are staff identifiable information in there, and the staff were afforded a level of confidentiality when they engaged with that review that we would be breaching if we published that report.
But could you just not redact names?
We've been asked to look at that, and we will. The reality is a redacted report would be wholly redacted. Because there is a rule that we follow that if more than 5 people could identify the persons or persons within that report, we shouldn't publish because it would breach their confidentiality. But we have been asked about that in the background, and we are doing some work on that. I think that is appropriate for us to do. Mrs. Beadle?
Why can't we see what you call the draft audit 1 report?
So the draft audit 1 report, I think I covered this, didn't I, in the extraordinary meeting. That's right. So it was to us, it was an interim report in the publication of a final report, and we have confirmed that with the authors of that report.
And is an interim not different to a draft report?
Yeah. So I'm comfortable to get into the detail of that with you as individuals and say, but we have responded quite a bit to that question, and we can reinforce that outside the meeting through in writing.
I can't see it.
Well, we can explain that in writing. I think that's
Explain it to everybody here.
well because actually I can't quite draw that into my mind, Mrs. Beadle. So it's a question that's asked that I'm not necessarily have the just to the front of my mind or to my fingertips. But that's not to say we wouldn't be happy to explain that. So then you've asked Mrs. McGurk about serious incidents. So there is this issue about the numbers of serious incidents reported, and what you've said is how many patients have died and their cases of harm being downgraded, meaning there was no serious incident, no investigation or duty of candour, and coroner's not informed. Given evidence that NEAS is downgrading harm levels and has underreported SIs since 2008, does the board agree that these matters require a full, independent and robust review? So those concerns were raised with us by the CQC. I think you'll be aware of that. And we accepted fully those recommendations. We have conducted a look back in all of those, but we have to rely on our process that we have in place. We can provide assurance today that any incidents that needed investigations are reviewed. They're reviewed in the most appropriate way. And whilst we accept actually that it really looked as though there was a problem for us, if you look at the meetings, etc., and the things that were in place, the discussions about our serious incidents continued throughout that period, but actually we did not follow best practice in relation to how we report that. We hold our hands up with that.
Yeah, so you agree that the serious incidents were underreported?
We agree that they were underreported in our public papers. Yeah, I don't think we can. The CQC were very open about that, and we've rectified that. But that's different from saying, do I think that actually we weren't looking at that? We were looking at those incidents, but the reporting mechanism wasn't best practice, and we've reviewed and revised that. Again, happy to speak outside to go through detail.
That's another incident where the public would lose faith.
We don't dispute that.
No.
I mean, we don't dispute that. You know, I said earlier, didn't I, when we touched on the CQC, we don't hide away if we haven't got it right. We stand at the front of here and we say we didn't get things right, and we fix it.
Admit anything about my daughter's death.
So the next one is this is quite difficult for me to read out. Should NEAS Chief Executive Helen Ray and the Chairman to my left offer their resignations? Or should NHS England remove the entire board for their governance failures and harm caused to patients and staff alike? So as board and executives, actually it's our job to take the findings of the review, to continue to provide assurances to families and make those fixes. So I think mine and Peter's job now, the job of work that we have, is to make the change, to deliver the shift, to improve the confidence, to recognise where we didn't get things right and sort it out. So my ambition is to continue to do that, Mrs McGurk.
So it doesn't bother you then that the public has lost faith in NEAS during your reign, if you like, and there's quite a few serious things that have happened during that time?
Mrs McGurk, can I just come in there? Because I think it's important that we all recognise that there have been some things that we've not got right. I think we've been quite open about that, and as a board, we absolutely understand that. I think to reinforce what Helen has said, it's really important now that we've got consistency of leadership, that understand what's got wrong, that have fully accepted Dame Marianne's recommendations, fully accepted the recommendations from the CQC report, and are, as a learning organisation, we're putting that right. I think if you look around the country, and obviously you're well informed about what happens in the NHS, a number of the failures elsewhere have been about inconsistency of leadership and the revolving door of executive teams and non-executive teams. And I, as the board chair, am absolutely determined with the executive leadership to make sure that we follow this through and put right what has gone wrong. And therefore, I do not accept that it's a case of standing down. I think that would absolutely do more harm than good, and we're going to see the job through.
Thank you. I think that they were all your questions, Mr McGurk, is that right? I think I've covered them. So, Peter, I think we're open to any other questions from
Thank you, Helen. Thank you very much.
public.
I'm very happy to take questions from members or members of the public present this afternoon. What I would ask is if we just wait for the microphone. That's not because we won't be able to hear you in the room, we can clearly do that, but that's for the live stream broadcast so that colleagues who are listening online or watching online can hear the question clearly. So, Simon Whopper, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have a question, but I think in the light of that last comment, could I just explain to people that behind the Board of Directors is a group of governors, about 30-odd people, some of whom are elected by the members of the Trust, and some are appointed by other bodies, the great and the good, the local authorities and so on. And one of our roles is to oversee the performance of the non-executive directors and the chairman, and to appoint those people. And if there was a strong feeling amongst the members and the governors that the chairman wasn't doing his job properly, then it would fall to me as the lead governor to tell him that. And I have to tell you that that is not the case at all. In fact, the way in which these difficult and terrible events have been dealt with at the board has been, I think, as transparent and as open as they could have been, given that there are lots of patients and staff whose lives have been impacted, and actually members of the board whose lives have been impacted by what's happened. I'll say no more about that. My question arises from two images which I keep recurring. Every time I turn on one of those ambulance programs, doesn't matter whether it's the West Midlands or the North East or now at Liverpool, paramedics end up going to people lots of times and metaphorically tearing their hair out, trying to find help for people who are regularly calling the ambulance service as a means of last resort. And the other I have in my mind is the zillions of pounds that the NHS spent on integrated care reorganisation and the involvement of local authorities in health and social care integration. So my question is, do you think over the last 18 months or so you could point to any evidence that there has been better integration of health and social care, particularly with those frequent callers in mind?
Great question, Simon. I think there have been some. I think there are some really good green shoots. So probably one of the examples I would use is the integration of our paramedic community service, which primarily supports our rural areas where actually we know that it is more challenging to reach people in a timely manner. So we have integrated some of our paramedic workforce alongside their primary care GP colleagues, their community service colleagues and their adult social care colleagues, so that when we respond to a call within those rural areas, we are able to access a really broad and wide range of services that would allow us to get to the patient in the right frame at the earliest opportunity. We've also worked with our primary care colleagues. I think probably the year before last, primary care were awarded some specific funding so that they could recruit allied health professionals. You can imagine how worried that made us, because we thought, God, everybody's going to just nick the fantastic paramedics that we've got. So instead of getting our kind of knickers in a twist about that, what we did was we took that forward and said, how could we support you in maintaining the clinical skills of our acute care colleagues, but enhancing their skills in community services and in that frame. There is an issue though, Simon, I think, with all of that, insofar as we talk about health and social care together, but actually we operationalise health and social care separately. So for me, if I was to say, what will help us with that, it would be that drawing that back together in the right frame, so we're having one single conversation. And when I put the slide up earlier about the integrated care partnerships across the north, south and central, that is exactly the work programme that we're setting in place with them. So green shoots, but have we got a lot further to go? Yeah, we absolutely do. So thank you, good question.
Other questions from members of the public or members of the Trust? No? Thank you. Oh, Lady there.
Thank you very much. I'm Councillor Bryony Holroyd, one of the Darlington Borough Councillors, and I sit on our Health and Housing Scrutiny Committee at Darlington Borough Council. You mentioned in your review of last year about improving energy efficiency and carbon impact, and obviously you mentioned improving various vehicles and things like that. I wondered whether you had or were making investment in, for example, electric or hybrid vehicles, installing renewable energy on your fixed buildings. You mentioned you didn't cover many buildings there, but also we've seen, particularly in larger urban areas, that paramedics can often get to people faster on a bicycle through thick traffic, but also obviously there'll be staff movements that are not emergencies, and again improving active and public transport options for people where that's possible.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Bryony. I'm going to ask Taryn potentially to come in on that question because she leads on this agenda. She'll do a far more eloquent job than I can.
I'll try. Yeah, so we have quite an ambitious green plan. We have recently had a visit from the NHS England national team where we've sort of showcased the things that we have done. So we've done quite a lot around our estate, so installing heat pumps, you know, doing as much as we can to improve the environmental sustainability of our estate. It's fair to say we've got quite a way to go with our fleet, but as you can imagine, to do that we need significant capital investment. So that's the ask that we're looking for now from our partners and nationally around how we can enable that move and that ambition to have our electrified fleet by 2030. We are, in the meantime, though, looking at the infrastructure that we need to put in place to support that. So we're installing chargers in our estate and looking how we can work with partners like hospitals to see how they can support installation of charging points. I think just to your point around the community aspect, I think one of the things that we really celebrate, which Helen mentioned, which is a bit left field from environmental sustainability, is our community first responders, because they are really valuable to us. And I think there is an element of how we can work with our councillors and local authority partners to drive up the number of community first responders that we have. And we've been really successful to work with Sunderland Council to support us, and it would be fantastic if some of our other councils could support us as well. So I look forward to perhaps discussing that afterwards as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Taryn.
Thank you, Taryn. Other questions or comments from participants here this afternoon? No? All done? Thank you very much, everybody. In closing, can I say thank you, Helen, for your contribution, and Taryn, your contribution as well. Thank you very much for everybody coming. I would just like to reiterate one thing, that I know Helen has been through a number of the questions that were pre-submitted. Can I reiterate our invitation, if anybody wants to come and talk to us directly, bring a friend, bring a tape recorder, bring a camera if you want. We're more than happy to do that. We're not trying to hide anything here. We're not trying to be non-transparent. We just want to engage in any meaningful process that we can. And that comes from me, it comes from Helen, and it comes from the complete board. So please take that away with you this afternoon. So finally, thank you very much, everybody. Can I call the annual general meeting and the annual members meeting for 2022-23 to a close. Good to see you all, and a safe journey home. Thank you.